Welcome to the Basic Bee podcast, a show for the wannabe SEO savvy service providers among us, for the coaches and consultants who dream of becoming known for their storytelling skills, not to mention the solopreneurs who straight up need to master all things social proof to increase sales. After a little reluctantly fully committing to this online world of business, I quickly realized I needed to get people to come to me. I needed to tell them I was here and how I could support them. I dove headfirst into social proof, which led me to SEO, which led me to storytelling. And now it gives me great joy to share what I've learned with other business owners so they skip the hard stuff and ease straight into sales. This podcast gives you expert insights, actionable takeaways, and casual convos with some of the online world's best and brightest experts and strategists. I think that's enough of an intro, so here we go. Welcome back to the Basic Bee podcast, and thanks for joining. Whether you're watching on YouTube or tuning in from your favorite podcast player, I'm thrilled to have you here. And today I'm joined by Rachael Woods. We're going to be talking about 9 grids, SEO, and coffee, and I'm really not sure which one I'm more excited about. But a quick intro for you. Rachael is the brains behind Woods Marcom, a marketing agency based in Northwest Washington. She helps small to medium-sized businesses create data-driven marketing strategies. And fun fact, I recently, as in this morning, learned that we both have a background in health and science, and yet we both now find ourselves in this digital marketing world. Life is just wild. Rachael, I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Oh my gosh, me too. Okay, I'm going to kick this off with a very subtle, not loaded question whatsoever. So, which do you believe is most important for sales? SEO, storytelling, or social proof? And why is that?
Oh, goodness. Is like one of the answers like all three? Can you put those all together?
You can't. So far, that's the popular option.
Well, I think there's just not one bucket that you can put all of your eggs in, right? You have to kind of think about different people and your audience, and people come across your content in different ways, and there's algorithms that change and things. And so I think the combination of the three is really where you're going to get the most out of your efforts.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's why we're here on this podcast.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. Well, I teased the little bit about us having the shared background with science and health. You want to elaborate on that a little bit and maybe tell us how you found your way into marketing?
Absolutely. Well, I actually started way back in my high school days, just really into the science track, taking the AP classes. And I actually had an AP class at like 7 a.m. For chemistry, which is before school even started. And I was that committed. I was up at the earliest hours of the day. And I went to college and getting my degree in chemistry. And I took a minor in human anatomy, and I was excited about maybe going into healthcare, maybe going to medical school, or I also was thinking about forensic science. So I was kind of looking at different things. And it turns out I pass out around blood and needles. So that pretty much changed all of that. And so, but I have this great scientific background with Excel spreadsheets, and we used to titrate little drops of liquid into having the equations and the chemicals change. So that's just kind of how my mind works. And it really applies nicely into marketing now, because everything that we do is so data driven, and everything on the digital side is trackable, and there's analytics, and you can measure trends and look at all those pieces. And I feel like we're going more and more in that direction where there's more to track and more data. So as I've gone into this creative field, I've really focused on that scientific analytics, data-driven perspective. And I think it really goes well together. It's an odd pairing when you look back at my history. It's a little odd. It always makes people kind of chuckle, but it works well. It works well. And it just kind of aligns with kind of how my brain works on tracking all of that.
Yeah, I don't think it's odd at all. I mean, if I did, then we would both be in trouble, because I, call myself a massage therapist turned marketer. I mean, it worked for us, right? Like, we're here.
Yep. No, definitely.
So that's actually a really good segue into, I think I'm going to go out of order with like the questions that I had in mind to ask you. But to give a little context for why you're here, for anyone who's listening or watching, I think you were on my email list, and I'm not sure how you found me, but I remember us having our initial conversation on Instagram. And if I remember, you were like, I don't know if this is weird, but I just thought I would come over and say hi. Was that you?
Yes.
It was the sweetest. And for anyone who doesn't know me, I love having conversations in the DMs. Like, I will live over there. If I'm avoiding anything or if I'm just like looking for community at any point during the day, I can always hop over to my DMs and like have conversations with people. So I remember having that conversation with you. We got on Zoom. I remember you telling me about passing out with like needles and things and how you
Yes.
became a marketer. But I would love to, like I said, we're going to go in a few different directions, but like SEO, 9 grids, coffee for sure. We're going to end with coffee questions. But when it comes to data-driven marketing, what does that look like in your world when you're working with a client? Like, what are you tracking? What's informing the recommendations that you're making?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing I do whenever I talk with a client is I always really encourage them before we put together a pay-per-click campaign or before we look at a social media strategy to pause for a minute and really gather that data. I think the data collection research step, I think it can feel overwhelming. I think it can feel potentially like you don't know where to start. Do you have tools that are accessible to do that research? And so it's easy and comfortable to say, okay, everyone is on this platform or everyone is doing this, so I should do that too. That herd mentality, we feel a lot of pressure from everywhere, probably in the world. And so I always caution everyone, say, okay, let's step back a minute. And I like to look at three different things. First, who's your target audience, and not just age and gender or maybe their income level, but really looking at what are their wants and needs? Where are they going for information? Who do they follow on social media? What do they like about your products? If they're maybe a customer who's using a different product or service, that you can talk with them about, what do they like about those services? What are your current customers thinking? Trying to look at that piece of it. The second piece is what are your competitors doing? One of the things that's really, really great to do is look really deep into what does their SEO look like? What are their paid ads look like? Are they doing paid ads, for example? What are their keyword strategies? And you can do one of two things with that. You can either be inspired by it and go, you know what? I love this company is just doing fantastically. I love it. I want to look at what they're doing and learn and be inspired. I think being inspired is fantastic. The other thing you can do is say, you know what, they are killing it over here. So I'm going to go this way and try to build a niche this way and really kind of differentiate myself. So having that information is really helpful so that you can make some of those decisions for your own business. And the third one I think is probably the most important is getting a really solid data-based look at your own digital infrastructure. I do a lot of website audits. I'm sure you do a lot of those too. Look in the deep in the SEO. And there's things that are standing in your way as a website, as a digital platform. You're thinking, I'm going to run this ad and my customers are going to my website and they're going to buy the thing. And then when you actually do the data and you look at it, your website may not be loading on mobile. It might be way too many clicks to get them where they need to go. You might be having issues with, a variety of different things. And if your website, it looks beautiful when you load it on your desktop in your office, but it's not showing up in search, it's not loading on mobile, the images are shifting around. I mean, whatever those things look like, maybe on a mobile or an iPad that are like overlapping text or something like that. Those are things you're not aware of, and those are standing in your way. So getting a really solid look at, back to that SEO, what needs to happen to make sure that your digital infrastructure is really solid. And once you have those three pieces, what I've found is typically your roadmap for next steps is really, really clear. And I would say probably 9 times out of 10, it needs to start with your own digital infrastructure before you run ads, before you spend a lot of time out, marketing. You need to really button up your customer journey and make sure that that's working for you. And so I've just found that every time I have that conversation, we pull that data, we look at that report, then we're like, okay, that is a very clear pathway of where we need to go. And then we can build on that and do these other campaigns once we're really solid in our own space.
I love that you start with like your world, because in my world, when I work with clients, I pretty much always start with social proof. Hence, like why at the beginning I talk about SEO, social proof, and storytelling. But social proof, if you can go, and by that I mean like, what are your clients saying? What are even people who are just in your world? Maybe they're on your email list, maybe they're followers on Instagram. What are they saying? How would they describe you? When are they sharing your profile or your email with someone? Like, what is happening? How are they saying things? So I love that you're starting with the data because it can be, yes, overwhelming, but it is super necessary to help us get where we want to go. And one kind of follow-up question that I have from that is, because I get this a lot with clients, how do you find your competitors?
Well, a lot of times when I work with businesses, they typically have a list of folks that they view as their competitors. And I start with them. And I use a variety of different tools to look at, their performance, both on what are they investing in digital search? What are those keywords? What are their ads look like? There's some different tools, and I could share kind of what those are that you can look at those different pieces. But one of the other things I do is I take kind of their list and then I start going out from there. So I'm working with a restaurant right now that's really a fine dining restaurant. I live in a rural, kind of smaller town in Northwest Washington. So it's one of very few fine dining establishments here. And they gave me a list of who they saw as competitors. But then I also just went out and started looking at the range of places of kind of within a, 20 to 25-mile radius. What else is coming up for the type of food that they're serving, for their type of ambience, trying to kind of look out. And I came up with a more broad list. And so some of it is definitely starting with where they're seeing, but then looking out. I mean, Google is obviously one of the best places just even to start of who else is coming up as a steakhouse, who else is coming up as having fine dining, where are these other places coming from? And then starting to look there, are their websites pulling those keywords in? Are their Google business profiles optimized? What do those pieces look like to kind of see who else you need to be looking at? And then also, how are they doing? Because if other places in your niche are not optimizing in some of these key areas, that's an excellent opportunity for you to just dial it in and be gangbusters in some of these places where your competitors are maybe not paying as much attention or not, investing as much in their infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's so wise. I love that. Okay, so you call yourself a fractional CMO. Will you tell us what that is and how someone like you can support business owners with things like SEO?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when I started my business, I've been in marketing for 20 years, and the last 8 of them were in healthcare specifically. So building healthcare infrastructure for healthcare systems. And when I decided to go out on my own and I was talking with some colleagues about this is what I want to do, blah, blah, blah. And someone said to me, he goes, oh, well, that's fractional marketing. I was like, oh, I've never even heard of that term. I didn't know what that was. And so I started kind of digging into that. And C-suite kind of fractional leadership is becoming more and more popular, particularly with startups, and thinking about if you're wanting to really leverage the expertise of a pro, of someone at the top of their game with the experience, having that expertise, that's fantastic. But typically then you're going to be looking at a 6-figure salary. And if you're looking at a CFO, which you probably need, thinking about a chief operations officer, a chief marketing officer, suddenly you've got this slew of giant salaries that you're trying to manage. And as a startup, that can be really unattainable, or as a small business, that can be really challenging. And so this fractional concept is really strong because what you can do is hire somebody who's got the great expertise, that knows exactly what you need, that can build teams or launch products or help you build infrastructure. And then they can say, okay, we can do that for X amount of hours a month. You're paying for that versus trying to say, okay, I need to find a 6-figure person that's going to come on my salary full time. It can be really flexible depending on what you need. It can be someone who's long-term, they're working with you for monthly for a year or 2 years. It might eventually be someone you want to bring on, but it also could be someone saying, hey, we really just need some help getting this project management system up, or we need some help getting our digital marketing structure built. We need some help building a marketing team and a marketing strategy so that then we can fund that later on. And so what I like to do is come in and say, okay, what is it that you need? And how can I be flexible and meet you where you are? And I have one client where I'm doing fractional CMO work, and we've literally gone kind of rode the seasons. They have a model that's very influenced by different parts of the year. And so thinking, okay, in the fall, we were really focusing on some Black Friday pieces and spent a lot of time building out campaigns, building different pieces of that. I built an online store for them and just looking at what that looks like. And then now we're looking into the spring, and it's a slower time for them. So how can we work on some of their infrastructure and their baseline? So when they get busy again, we have all of that in place. Because when we came in and they had this really busy period, we didn't have a good email marketing infrastructure. We didn't have welcome sequence. We didn't have some pieces in place. And so we kind of tried to do the best we could, but what can we do about taking those lessons and then building them across for when they're less busy? Another thing that someone mentioned to me that I thought was brilliant is if you have a marketing director or a marketing leader that's going on maternity leave, a fractional CMO can come in and just kind of keep everything running for 3, 4, 5 months. They could even kind of stay on a little bit longer to kind of help with any kind of handoff and things like that. The fractional, that really flexible piece is really what's helpful. And there's a variety of, I've seen fractional CFOs and fractional COOs on LinkedIn. And I think it's gaining traction of allowing businesses to stay lean and stay nimble and access the services that they need at the expertise that they need. You don't have to commit to someone who maybe doesn't have the expertise that you want because you can afford that. You can invest in a really high expertise professional and just look at specifically what you need from that contract. So it's kind of exciting. I really enjoy it. It's some fun work. I get to do all kinds of in the weeds stuff and working with teams. And it's been a really fun journey.
That is really cool. And I remember one of my friends, I can't remember if she came in as a fractional CMO as well or what, but I know I've seen the fractional term coming up a lot. So not everyone is familiar with it. So that was a really great breakdown. Thanks for sharing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I also really like the idea too of, like you said, if someone's going off on maternity leave, that's a really wonderful time to bring in a fractional CMO. That's just super smart. So let us, subtly wiggle over to 9 grids, because as soon as I heard that you did these, I was like, what? This is fascinating. So there's a bunch of questions that I have around this. But first off, would you say that there's a type of business or business owner that 9 grids work best for? Like, who should consider this and who should just be like, oh, that's a cool thing, but that's not for me?
Such a great question. In case anyone's not familiar. So a 9 grid is when you take your Instagram account, and I sometimes do a 12 grid. I don't know if I'm a little bit of a rule breaker. So sometimes I do 12 grids. So get a little mavericky there. But it's when you take your Instagram grid and you create a graphic out of 9 or 12 of the squares. And they can be cohesive. So it's kind of fun. Graphically, you can kind of start having pictures that kind of go over the lines and things. But basically, you're taking 9 or 12 static images in Instagram, and you're using that strategically as basically creating a page from your Instagram. So where traditional Instagram is you add posts occasionally and you're posting once a day or once a week or whatever your cadence is, you create that grid with the intention that it does not change. And the benefits of that is that, one, it allows you to kind of reduce the updates. So you want to think about, if someone comes to your Instagram, you want to think about building that grid in a way that they can capture any information that you want them to capture from your Instagram pretty quickly. You want to think about that really strategically. But then once it's there, you don't have to continue creating content. And so that really comes down to who should have a 9 grid. It really needs to be a company who is not relying on Instagram for sales and conversions. I think you can get some sales and conversions potentially, but updating Instagram is where you're getting that visibility and that traction, right? So it's always about new content, fresh content. That's how Instagram, as you know, kind of gets in front of people. So when you create a static grid, that freshness, that renewed energy is not coming up in your feed. The point of that is really, if people are looking for you, they come across you elsewhere, and then they want to go to Instagram, they find you maybe through a search, they are wanting to learn more. I had a client once who, when we did their data, we recognized that they weren't posting at all, but their visibility was actually going up significantly. And so people were clearly coming to them either to validate or searching for them, clearly was not coming in through their posts. And so thinking about, if they're coming to you from another way, what would you want them to see or have access to in terms of information as more of a page? I would not recommend this for someone, like you said, that was wanting to really drive conversions from Instagram, because there's going to be a lot of time that is just sitting there. But it's really, really fantastic for businesses that are investing in other spaces and they just want to have a presence. They just want to have the availability for people to access the information when they go there. We have a rental cabin in Mount Baker, And I started an Instagram page for this years ago, terrible at updating it. Creating content for it was just not something on my radar. And so we created a 12 grid for that page. And then we also used highlights. There's a number of different things you would want to do with your Instagram page. So the whole thing is really strategically built. But now I don't have to update or try to create content. And if you go to the page, you won't see the Christmas tree from last year because I've now made it really kind of an evergreen graphic in a static grid. And if I do want fresh information, I can post stories or reels or things like that. So it gives you some options, but it's really, really great for someone that basically is investing their marketing efforts in other places and just want to have a presence on Instagram for people to find them. And then it would be to jump into your website or your sales landing page or wherever else you want them to go. It's really a jumping off point.
I love that so much. And of course, I saved the Instagram handle for the podcast name. And I'm like, oh, this sounds really appealing because I love doing reels. I love doing stories, but coming up with more of the like carousel content or what have you, it feels a little bit heavier. And I don't know that I really want to take that on. So this sounds very appealing. So with that in mind, how would someone possibly, if they don't want to work with the great Rachael Woods, how would they possibly go about making a 9 grid? And mostly I'm curious about, like, you kind of covered this, but how do we figure out exactly what to put on each image?
Absolutely. Well, I have a great kind of step-by-step how-to on my blog. So if you ever wanted to pop over there, there's some steps on that. But kind of the way that we approached it when I was really starting to think about doing this, I'd seen a number of other people do it, is I tried to think of, okay, what are 12 things that I would like people to know about our Airbnb? So people want to know, how many bedrooms are there and, what are there some restaurants in town? And so you can think of it that way, because if people click on that, then you can have the content for them to read on the caption. So we were trying to think about that. Another way to do it is to just sort of visually create one big visual graphic that is appealing. And then you can use consistent captions for each one. For us, it was like, hey, we have this great Airbnb. Look at the seasons that you have. And I took 6 captions that were really keyword rich and repeated those twice in each one. So thinking about search and then thinking less about having someone have to click on each one of those squares, but more about just overarching and sending them out to the website, or we are on VRBO or Airbnb. So I started with that 12 square, and then I was like, well, let's just do one giant graphic that is kind of overlaps, that gets people interested and then gives them the opportunity to go out for information. And I've seen it done both ways. I've seen it done where, here's our, our origin story. And sometimes people have kind of like some arrows or some nice kind of visuals that kind of walk people through, but it can be like, look at the podcast, read our reviews, thinking about some different pieces that would be interesting for people to click on. And then that's, evergreen content. And then I definitely think about your highlights, because as you get new reviews and new, if you're the number 1 podcast on, Spotify, things like that, keeping those pieces up here at the top, or here's our hot topics, things like that. Cause those are things that you can add additional, stories and pin those. People can browse through things like that. And then of course, the making sure you're really strong on your keywords and in the bio at the top. That's always a hot one to make sure that you're doing that one well.
Oh, for sure. I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because I constantly, almost every week, definitely monthly, almost every week, have someone find me on Instagram and they have said, I searched Instagram for SEO copywriter or case study copywriter and you came up. I've had podcast invites that way. I've had people ask me to come in and guest teach. I've had a number of things happen like that. So it is huge. Do not sleep on that, people. Do not sleep on that.
Well, that's the thing with those captions too, is think really strategically, especially since you're not going to be updating that. Be really thoughtful about what you're putting in those captions, because that's the same kind of stuff that's going to get pulled up. The keyword strategy is strong in Instagram.
Oh, yes, it is. Would you also use hashtags on those captions?
I used a couple hashtags. I am kind of leaning towards the hashtags are becoming less critical. They still are a thing, but I think they're becoming less of a thing than just making sure you're really strong on keywords. From my perspective, if there's some hashtags that are really commonly used, then definitely add them. But I'm not as big of a proponent as the 30 hashtags on the posts.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen articles go both ways, so I'm
I
not the expert
know.
on that space, but I'm a pretty big proponent that the keywords in your content are kind of where we're headed in the world.
That is very interesting. I like using them. I used to be a consistent 30 hashtag user, and then I
Mm-hmm.
was recently given the advice of trying 7. So I've been leaning into that more as just like a thing to try and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, I did that and I didn't post for like 8 weeks because I just
Yeah.
needed to hibernate.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. Like everybody has their hot take on that. And
Mm-hmm.
do what feels good for you. If doing 30 hashtags feels overwhelming, try 7. If even doing
Right.
any of them feels overwhelming, then just like you said, make sure that there are keywords in your caption for sure. And I would definitely love to grab that blog link from you where you're
Yeah.
walking people through the 9 grids. I'll make sure to grab that and then add it below wherever you're watching or listening. All right,
Perfect.
let us end with a fun one.
Okay.
So I promised coffee. So we are here with the coffee. What is your favorite coffee? Is there like a brand or a favorite type of way that you like to make your coffee? Tell me all the things.
Yeah. Well, it depends on where I'm at, right? So if I'm at home in my leggings and sweatshirts, I'm a black drip coffee girl. Just, I've got the coffee maker. But if I'm out and about, I love an Americano. And I
Mm,
typically so in Northwest Washington, there's a string that's Would-Be Coffee or Would-Be Coffee Company. I actually get to know the baristas when I go through. So they know my beverage, which my husband thinks is the most ridiculous thing. He's not a coffee drinker. So the fact that I know the baristas and we're all friends and we catch up
yeah.
whenever I'm in the line, he just does not understand that. He will never understand it.
No, that's really funny because my boyfriend doesn't drink coffee either. He's like, this is ridiculous. Although yesterday morning he surprised me. He's done this a couple times where I've had very kind friends and clients and even like companies I've worked with as an independent contractor. They will give me gift cards for coffee money.
Oh, yeah.
And so yesterday we were going grocery shopping and we like going really early. We'll get there, usually within the first 15 minutes of them opening. And we were going to be early. And Daniel was like, do you want to stop off for some coffee? I'm like, who are you? Yes.
Yes. Yep.
But I worked at Starbucks for about 2 years before I went into massage school, before I became a marketer. And so I completely understand and almost get teary-eyed thinking about you talking to the baristas and them really getting to know you. I ended up nannying for people, pet sitting for
Yeah.
them. I have LinkedIn friends that have known me forever. So
Yeah.
those relationships are very meaningful.
They are. Well, and especially if I don't commute on a regular basis anymore, obviously,
Hmm.
because I work from home. But when I used to commute in, like you get to know people because of their shift. They're always there in the
Yeah.
morning. And yeah, I've gotten to know people. There's a barista. I used to work in Anacortes 1,000 years ago, this little waterfront town out
Oh,
here. And I got to know literally the barista who was always at the window. But at the time, he was there every morning and he was a part-time like DJ for parties and stuff. So then
yeah.
as I became working in nonprofit work, I would have him come out and DJ. So, I mean, yeah, you build those relationships with people. And it's funny how you think that, you see them for a total of a minute or two in the drive-through, but,
Yeah.
you start really getting to know people and talking about where they went on vacation and how their holidays were.
Yeah.
And I am a person who I gravitate towards warmth and friendliness, kind of when you
Hmm.
were mentioned earlier of just like, I'm like, hi, can I say hello? I love your content. Because I just find that is important to me as a human. And so
Yeah.
places I go, I'm like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah, the funniest thing for me was that my Starbucks closed. We weren't as profitable in the afternoon. We were slammed in the morning. It was amazing. We had the most dysfunctional like family relationship between all of the employees, but it was amazing. Like I wouldn't trade those years for anything. But, you see someone in an apron and a hat every single morning. And then I would go there was like one Target that was really close to this Starbucks. And I started to go in there after our store had closed. And every time I went in, I would see a customer and they would be like, squinting and doing
Yeah.
that double take, like,
Yeah.
I know you. Where do I know you from? So I got to the point where I was like, hi, Starbucks. And they were like,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Yep. Yep.
oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for joining me and talking all the things. I really loved it. I'm going to make sure we put all the links in all the places for everyone so they can click and get in touch with you. But where is the best place you would say for people to reach out and say hi?
Absolutely. Well, I am on Instagram, Woods Marcom. So it's WOODSMARCOM. You can also find me on Facebook at the same handle, but Instagram is probably more my go-to. And then my website is woodsmarcom.com. And yeah, I'll send you the blog link and that type of thing. And I'm really in a phase of building community. And I would also just love to talk real deep, nerdy data. If you're interested, I can just dive right in the weeds and get in there. I love it. So welcome all of those opportunities.
Yeah, no kidding. That's so perfect. Okay, make sure you follow, subscribe, share, tag both of us so we can keep this SEO party train going. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Bye. That was really something, wasn't it? Let that really sink in and guide you toward being the answer to even more Googled questions. Thanks so much for joining me this episode. You are the reason this show exists and that it keeps growing. You know, thanks to all those follows and reviews. If you know someone who could benefit from what was shared, send it to them. We don't do shy around here. If you thought of clarifying or follow-up questions while listening, you know what to do. Say hi on Instagram. Check the show notes for all the things that were mentioned, and I'll talk to you soon, friend. Okay, you get it. You know SEO is important, but no, you're not interested in learning another skill. Who has the time? But who are you supposed to trust with the task of getting SEO to work for you? Someone who won't ghost you mid-project or treat you like a dum-dum lollipop. Someone who actually wants to empower you and your team with all things SEO. Hi, yes, it's me, Brittany, and you are the person I created the SEO packet for. You're curious, you want to understand this thing better, but only a little bit. You don't actually want to do the doing. This way, you get the key SEO stuff super fast, and you get support throughout and beyond the project. No more letting Google gift you the wrong SEO strategy. Time to put the right words in the right places and get found online by the right people. Find all the info you need below.